And Daniel. So Lily is a second year student in zoology at the University of Cardiff, and Daniel is a master's student in the university in the Netherlands of Wageningen.
Yes.
And
Good pronunciation.
yeah, I know.
I've been.
Wageningen.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's doing ecology there. And in a funny way, their both projects ended up mingling together, and so they are studying the impacts of rewilding. What would be the impacts of rewilding the local estuary, or the local marshes actually, which have been diked for years. It all started because there was a breach some months ago.
Marcel, they will.
I don't know.
Ruin.
I don't know. I don't know what they're going to say. It's going to be a surprise for me as well. And therefore, we jumped with that idea. Let's study what that would be. So, Daniel, Lily, over to you. Knock them out.
Yeah, so
Sorry. Oh yeah. So the title of this presentation is Past and Present Birds of the Alvor Estuary, and actually this is another one of the series, the series that we've now started, the communication series that we've now started, which is Naturally Speaking at Rocha, Portugal. So it won't go on video. If anyone doesn't want to show, just put a thing on your face. It won't go on our YouTube channel, and it is shared
And
on
on
our
newsletter as well.
and in the newsletter, and it's also shared in our social media pages. So you're gonna be stars.
famous. Alright, hello everyone. Hi. Thanks for coming here to Russia and to see this presentation. So Lily and I are going to give a talk about salt marshes. And I think maybe to start off, a good question would be, who knows what a salt marsh is? I think that it's good. I'll give a little bit of background on salt marshes. So pretty much a salt marsh is an ecosystem that comes to be when a terrestrial ecosystem meets the marine ecosystem. It's like where the sea and land meet each other. And it's often comes to be when a little bit of a sheltered area that's a bit protected from the waves, from the strong winds, from the strong everything pretty much. And there's some sediment begins to accumulate. And in this sediment, after a while, some of the first really brave pioneer species come in. And these are a very specific type of plant that can actually resist the salt. I don't know the English word for it, but you can also eat it. Salicornia it's called. Well, whatever, you can eat it at least. And these type of plants, they, because of their root system, they actually accumulate more and more sediment. So what first starts as what you call a mudflat, just a sediment with nothing in it, then becomes a low marsh once the first plants come in it. And then eventually, once it accumulates enough sediment, it will become a high marsh. And therefore, in a lot of salt marshes, you have these sort of three areas: the mudflats, the lower marsh, and the high marsh. And salt marshes are a very important ecosystem. I think personally they're one of the most undervalued ecosystems through both people and policy. So I think what would be a nice question is, what kind of ecosystem services do you think a salt marsh could provide?
Go on, you tell us.
Well, I'll tell you in a bit, but I thought maybe if any of you have any ideas, any suggestion is welcome.
Yeah. Well, water purification.
Sure, very true.
Flooding, absorbing floods.
Yeah, definitely.
And
Carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
Carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, those were the main ones, I think. And the really interesting thing you say about carbon dioxide is that actually salt marshes are one of the most efficient ecosystems on Earth at sequestering carbon.
Mitigating, yeah.
And also clearing them therefore releases a lot of carbon, because all the sediment that was first like protected from the water, oxygen couldn't reach it. If you reclaim the land, the sediment starts decomposing, and then you get a lot of carbon emissions. So it works both ways. If you restore it, a lot of carbon comes back, or a lot of carbon gets sequestered. If you destroy it, a lot of carbon goes into the atmosphere. So now you can maybe already see why it's such an important type of ecosystem. One other thing they do, which is really important, is that they're really good at cycling nutrients. So oftentimes the rivers have all these nutrients in them, also a lot of pollution sometimes, and the microbial activity in the salt marsh can actually be really effective at changing the chemical composition of these pollutants and actually storing them in the sediments so they're no longer of any harm to, well, whatever swims in the sea or in the estuary. So now that I tell you how amazing salt marshes are, I guess we come to the sadder point, how salt marshes are actually doing worldwide. Salt marshes have been in decline since, well, pretty much the beginning of mankind. We've really had a habit of clearing them for agriculture, land reclamation, urban areas, like, you know, all these coastal cities, a lot of them used to be salt marshes. And of course it makes sense, we need the space, but it has led to salt marshes doing, well, not so well globally. And in the Ria del Alvor, the estuary, the estuary where we are now, there's actually still salt marshes, which is really nice. The only issue is, as Marcel already described, they've been completely diked off. So a lot less sediment can flow in, like there's small inlets in the dikes, but sediment can't really flow in that well through there, which really interferes with the ability of these salt marshes to function. Recently there have been floods. These dikes are becoming more and more, well, the state of the dikes is becoming more and more precarious as climate change worsens, sea levels rise, they break more and more frequently, which has basically led to the motivation of my project. What would happen if we actually let these dikes break, or if we increase the inlet size of the dikes? So for that reason, I investigated the Ria del Alvor estuary here, which is drawn out very nicely by Lily here. And I kind of separated two areas here. There's this bottom estuary, which is a bit more natural. The inlet is larger, and the makeup of the island of the salt marsh is a lot more, yeah, I would say natural in the way that it's less rectangular and it's more. There's like this really big island in the middle, and then there's some little scattered things besides that. So it's a lot more, not random, but it's a lot more natural shape. Whereas this other estuary, which is this one, this is the other one that I looked at, it's very much rectangular. Like there's dikes and lower areas, so it's a much more artificial makeup of the salt marsh. And what I did in my study is I compared these two areas in terms of vegetation and bird communities. And I did that through just going into the marsh, looking at the vegetation, sampling it, and walking through the marsh with a telescope to see the birds. Not at the same time, thankfully, because that would scare the birds. And I basically did this for about... I did this pretty much for about 2 months, just sampling it most days. And what I found was quite interesting. So what I found for vegetation, first of all, was that in this marsh, there was a lot more high marsh compared to this marsh. And I think the reason for this is likely because the sediment flow is more in the bottom marsh, because the inlet of the dike is larger, which allowed the succession that I described earlier, the plants attracting the sediment, the marsh increasing in height, that allowed that to happen more. Whereas in this marsh, it's a lot more, there was very little high marsh, which is likely due to the low sediment inflow. What we also saw was that the bird communities were significantly different between the two areas. Just the community, the type of birds that were attracted were, well, very different. And all of this led us to kind of conclude that the management of a salt marsh really has influence on the way it functions, and therefore we would argue for a larger inflow of sediment to be allowed into the marsh, therefore to make a bigger hole in the dikes, pretty much. And we believe that this would probably improve, besides the vegetation and birds, also the ecosystem services that are provided by the marsh. And with that, I leave the stage to Lily.
Following on from what Daniel said, I'm going to be talking about specifically 2 surveys that we've had. One has been a very long-term monitoring project that they have here, which for a very long time has been carried out solely by Guy, so it's an amazing, huge data set. And I'll quickly point out the area that we survey. So it's very similar to Daniel's, and we do this loop here, and we go up here, and so we have these different areas, and we can group the areas and see the differences in the birds. And I'm looking at this data from starting in 2000, so it's a really, really long time, and we can see all these different changes. And I'm going to shorten down to just two main events that you can really see show through in the data. So I don't know if anyone knows, we also have, if you look across here, marshland here, which we can no longer survey, but in 2006 there was some ploughing in the fields here, and you can see around this time a huge influx of birds to this area, as they were displaced from the activities that were going on there. And so this seems great, we've got loads of new birds in our area. These birds didn't stay, so it would suggest that the marsh as it was at that time was already at a maximum capacity as to what it could support bird community-wise. So these numbers dropped again after a couple of years, we went back to what it was before, which, I mean, I didn't see it, but I'm sure people visiting would think it supports a lot of birds. This is a really great habitat. But then, actually, 2019, we see a huge, huge change in the marsh. And I don't know if anyone saw the marsh before 2019, if they remember what it was like. And basically around this time, obviously it was COVID, so not many people will have visited, but around then we had a breach. Would I be right in saying the breach occurred here, Marcel?
Slightly lower.
A bit lower, yeah.
Yeah, more or
So,
less around that.
Yeah, so we had this breach happen, and it really changed a lot about the marsh. I'm not as good as Daniel's explaining all these different sediment flows, so I'm just going to talk exactly about what happened, you can see with the bird communities. And so I focused on only 4 species. I focused on 2 of the most abundant, which are the dunlin and the redshank, and then I've always focused on 2 of the breeding birds. We only have 2 breeding birds down here in the marsh, and I don't know if anyone knows what those 2 are.
Still.
Yes.
Still.
We have the black-winged still and a slightly more elusive one.
Abordam.
Abordam, actually I haven't counted because that's only started in the last 2 years, 2, 3, and it's actually really links in well that it only happened after this breach event happened. But the other one is the Kentish plover. And so looking at this data, you can see the numbers were very, very stable for a long time. This breach happened, which really changed. The water came now all the way up to here, which it never used to do. And this breach has just been left as been repaired, but there's still this water flow that never happened, and the water's now much higher. And what this did was many birds left this area, and so if you only looked at this area, you would go, okay, why are these birds decreasing? But actually a huge number came here, and so there's a huge, huge increase overall in the marsh. It now supports a lot more birds than it used to, which is really, really great. That it's the same area, nothing had to be done, except just letting nature do its course. And now we support a lot more birds than it did before. And like you said, the abborset, a bird that we never had breeding here, is now breeding. And so it'll be really interesting to see, even years from now, what other birds might begin breeding if the habitat is allowed to return to what it naturally would be. And then just to add on another study, which also kind of shows the same thing, but on a much faster scale. I don't know if anyone knows the field. So if we picture ourselves at the roundabouts, the one that you've all drove in on, if you go towards Lagos, there's a field. You might have seen cows in there. It's on your left as you drive towards Lagos. Around late September time, we had very high tides and we experienced another breach. And so this was a really great chance for us to go and monitor and see these changes in the birds there. And it was a really, really rapid change. Purely just from a small break in the dike that happened naturally, so much water is now coming in. We reached a maximum of 150 birds only across about a month of this area returning to what it naturally would be like. The majority of that was flamingos, but we supported up to 12 different species. Unfortunately, this dike was fixed. So when you drive now, you'll see it's dry again. You may see the odd heron at the river, but compared to 150 birds, you won't see that now. And so I think both go to show if we allow these areas to naturally go back to what they were, we'll just support so many more birds, and as Daniel can see, a lot better plants as well, and it's just much better for the natural ecosystem.
I don't think it will happen, will it? People won't let them.
It is expensive though.
Yeah.
It's very expensive to maintain them, and the value because we like to put prices on these
Yeah,
sites.
yeah.
It's a very poor pasture land. It's very salty. They only have a few cows on there, possibly just to keep the grass short. And so I would argue we are not losing much to allow it to go back.
Okay.
People aren't losing their livelihoods.
No, there's nothing.
That was the
there's nothing
purpose of the dikes then, was it? To keep that land dry.
It increases, it's just more area for agriculture, for
And
houses.
the camera maintain those dikes, do they? The local council?
I believe
No, it's Associação de Regantes.
Sorry?
The Associação de Regantes, so the association which is in charge of the irrigation system in the area,
Okay.
From the Bravura.
from Bravura Reservoir.
Okay.
In the UK though, there is big productivity in salt marsh lamb and cattle, which is seasonal, but the land floods in the winter, dries out, and you suddenly see the sheep out again, the cattle, and they have a premium price on that particular product
It has so many
because
benefits,
it's delicious.
So they could find
They
something
could
else to
find
farm there.
another
Yeah.
use for it.
Yes, it's local, it's meat that isn't flown in, it has such a lower
Yeah.
ecological
So
price.
all the natural herbs.
Yeah, there's a lot of salt marsh plants that are edible as well.
Yes.
Also in the UK, I don't know all the English names because I'm Dutch,
No.
but there's like at least 4 or 5 salt marsh species that you can eat. So,
Yeah.
It's thinking outside the box, isn't it?
Yes, but that's always
Yeah.
happened. That's history in those areas. Yeah.
So who knows? Maybe there's a future for that.
And you said when there was a breach, you could see much more birds in the lower marsh. Because they went from the higher marsh to lower marsh. You also had
They
an
went
increase-
from here up to here.
Okay, and this is the lower marsh, right?
Lower, it's,
It is now.
it's,
Yeah.
the name's really yeah.
But there was another breach into the upper marsh there as well, at one point. So the water was coming into both areas. It's really bad with the floods.
Yeah, so now all the way up to here,
So did you also had an increase of the total numbers of birds in the total marsh, or were just the distribution different?
It's something I'd like to look at if I have time, but because I focus on these 4 species just for time, that it's something that I can say has definitely happened because I've only focused on individual species. Sure.
And probably the change is also quite recently as well, so maybe the data is not enough, but maybe in 2 or 3 years,
Yes,
when we've had 6 years of flooding,
definitely needs
the
a
data will
follow-up.
be
Yeah.
better.
But you have to keep in mind that when it was breached, we did not have access to all the areas, so all the bird counts were partial.
Yeah.
Actually, I have a question. If you let more water coming in, you may get fewer places for species to breed, like the Kentish plover, which is a threatened species.
Well, I mean, it depends. If you let more water come in, it doesn't specifically mean there will be less land. Because if in that way more sediment gets flown in, gets like deposited,
Okay.
you would allow more. You would still have the same amount of land. It would just, on average, be higher.
Well, from my experience, when the breach happened, the most southern part was basically a lagoon.
Yeah.
But in that case, I guess you should. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm thinking in general also the breach, of course, is at a very, very high water level, which happens probably like once or twice a year. I don't know. I don't have enough experience
Now,
here.
water was coming in all the time.
After the breach, it was always that high.
Yeah.
Then I guess that should be definitely taken into account, because I guess maybe there should be some place of the marsh that you should at least leave for the Kentish plovers then. But I guess on the other hand, I guess it makes it a difficult question where you sort of have in one hand the functioning of the marsh as a whole, all the ecosystem services it provides. Then on the other hand, you have the Kentish plover and its breeding, and I guess that's a difficult assessment you'll have to make. It's like what weighs more heavily. I'm of the opinion probably the salt marsh functioning weighs more heavily, but that's just my. But I think it is a good point to make. It depends on what you value and what, as a nature conservation organization or as a government.
But in one place now, down it's getting very narrow.
Yeah.
And at some stage that is going to go.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
it's gonna go.
It will.
It looks I've walked by it so many times, and each time I think, how is this still alive?
It's going to go again.
Yeah.
It will.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, Marcel's really.
That's very interesting.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that was very good.
Thank you, Lily and Daniel.